If you're going to come back, at least let us know. Dad didn't know you were coming, so he went out on his own again. What's wrong with coming back home without notice? By the way, on my way here, I stopped by Grandma's house. Mom, you're sending Grandma money, aren't you? She was happy that she could buy regular potatoes instead of the defective or discolored potatoes from potato farmers. But her room only had a blanket laid out, still looking minimalist. What? Just a blanket in the room? My son, who had just started working, came home after a long time. The conversation with my son was casual, but I felt a sense of discomfort from it. Despite sending money to my mother, it seemed she was living a very frugal life. I listened to my son's words and frowned. Then, perhaps because my son had stopped by, my mother called right then. Hello, Nick just came to my house a while ago. Yes, he's here at our house now. I see. So, we talked about the money you've been sending. I thought I should thank you properly. Thank you for always sending $20. Because of that, I can eat potatoes. What? $20? I'm sending $2,000, though. What do you mean $20? Huh? $2,000? But I only received $20. If what my mother was saying was true, then $1,980 was going somewhere else than to my mother. This was serious. After hanging up with my mother, I clenched my bank book and headed to the bank with my son to check the situation. At the bank, the culprit was quickly identified. From the next month, I decided to send my mother a lot of food instead of money. It seems she was happier with this than money. Also, by not sending money, the culprit would be in trouble. However, just troubling the culprit wasn't enough. I decided to make them regret stealing my mother's money for the rest of their life. I am Diane. I am 47 years old and work in sales. My husband, Robert, also works in sales. Our son, Nick, just graduated from university and started working. We're finally done with parenting, having moved out of the house. My husband helped me a lot with parenting. Though when I say help, it's not like he changed diapers or did housework. To put it simply, it was about money. I think my sense of money is a little off compared to others. To explain why and how I made my husband endure financially, I should start from my upbringing. I grew up in extreme poverty in the countryside, to the extent that people would be taken aback when I talked about it. My family's house was about a 10-minute drive uphill, with no other houses around, just our standalone house. It's a typical countryside story, where the house is large but old and run down. We also owned unnecessarily large land around the house. While cycling to elementary and middle school was banned, my house was so inconveniently located that I was the only exception allowed to cycle to school. Going to school was easy because it was downhill, but coming back, I had to push my bike up a slope that took about 10 minutes by car, which took about an hour. The inconvenience of my family's home wasn't just its location. Although we had electricity, there was no gas. We used wood for baths, cooking, and heating. We used spring water. When I saw the descriptions and photos of old period lifestyles in my elementary school textbooks, I thought, this is just like our life now. Life hasn't changed much from the past. It's a fond memory. My parents were farmers in such an inconvenient place. They owned a lot of land, but the fields weren't very large, just enough for 2 people to manage. However, considering my parents worked alone, the fields felt relatively large, and we had some farming machinery like tractors and vegetable washers. Income also came from natural vegetables like potatoes that grew around our house. People who dream of a self-sufficient life might envy this. Living in such an environment since I was small, I wanted to leave home as soon as possible. So, when it was time to apply for high school, I made a request to my parents. This is about high school, I want to go here. A boarding school? Do you think you can handle dormitory life? I can. Plus, look at this part of the brochure. It says it nurtures not just academic abilities but also social skills. Living in the mountains, I might be a bit out of touch with societal norms. I want to correct that gap during my high school years by living in a dormitory. I desperately tried to persuade my parents while showing them the brochure. I listed all the appropriate reasons, but my real intention was just to escape from the inconvenient life where the toilet and bath were outside the house. After graduating from high school, I started working at the company where I am still employed. That's where I met my husband. Ah, hello. I'll go call the person in charge. You're leaving the office now, right? I can go to the reception myself, it's fine. No hurry, please don't worry about it. Meeting my husband by chance in front of his company, he turned around to go back inside to fetch the staff member. My husband was working in sales at my client's company. We both had joined our respective companies straight after high school and were only 2 years apart in age, which made it easy for us to get along. There wasn't any dramatic development, but my husband and I gradually became closer, started dating, and the following year after our marriage, our son Nick was born. The birth of our son brought happiness to both my husband and me. However, the arrival of our son brought certain changes to our life. Since both of us were high school graduates, our salaries were a bit lower compared to others in our age group. Moreover, given the current economic climate, the amount we earned was somewhat insufficient. Because of this, I would always be worried, looking over our household budget and bank book at the end of each month. This month is tight again. Is it that bad? Are we going to be unable to live like this? Not to that extent, but Nick is going to grow up and will need more money, right? Then there's our retirement. With things as they are, I'm just a bit too anxious. I see. Even if we work hard, there's a limit to what we can do on our own. Maybe we should just pray for the economy to recover soon? We can't just wait for that. We need to think of a more practical solution. All right. Let's do this. With that, I slapped the table and stood up with determination. My husband, not knowing what I was planning, just stared at me, mouth clenched, nervous of what's coming next. The next day, I went to the home center and bought planters, fertilizer, vegetable seeds, and more in large quantities. Drawing on my experience of living almost self-sufficiently in the countryside, I decided to embark on an extreme cost-saving lifestyle that would shock those around me. Our balcony and entrance would be filled to the brim with planters. Living in an apartment, it was crucial to ensure that measures against insects and birds were in place to avoid complaints. Having helped my parents with farming until middle school, I was confident in my knowledge in this area. However, saving money within just the household wasn't enough. I had more to draw from my upbringing in the mountains. Oh, we're having fried vegetables today. Huh? What's this? I've never seen this vegetable before. Those are dandelion and wild spinach. And over here, we have wild garlic and nasturtium. Wait. Are these the ones that grow by the roadside and along rivers? Yes, but there are quite a few wild plants in town that are edible. Are these safe to eat? Unlike me, who grew up in the wilds of the mountains, my refined husband, raised among people, was skeptical of wild plants picked from the surroundings. However, his reluctance was only at first, and he soon came to appreciate the taste of wild plants. Now, he even says his favorite dish is a salad made with wild spinach. Occasionally, we go back to my family home to get vegetables. You'll take some potatoes back with you, right? Of course. Can I take the whole basket? I took a generous amount of long-lasting vegetables. Even when dealing with my mother, it's embarrassing to say we'll eat all the vegetables we receive by ourselves. Therefore, I always lied about sharing them with my mom friends. When we visit my hometown, we also stop by the local corn farmers, mushroom farms, and poultry farms on our way back. In our area, we have acquaintances who have always given us discounted products with minor issues. At home, we naturally save on electricity and gas. Clothes, appliances, and furniture are primarily bought from recycle shops. Of course, I've had to ask Robert to forego personal allowances. Thanks to our thorough saving efforts, we've started to save a bit of money, and I no longer have to fret over our bank book at the end of each month. However, Robert seemed a bit constrained by our extreme saving lifestyle. Now that we're getting a bit more financial leeway, do we need to keep this up? Maybe it's okay to buy new clothes once in a while? We do buy new ones for birthdays and Christmas, don't we? Yeah, but isn't twice a year a bit too infrequent? And even then, it's just a pair of jeans or a jacket, right? I too wish I could buy more clothes or cosmetics, and I'd like to visit the hair salon more often. But even if we have a bit more leeway, a large expense can quickly drain our funds. Let's endure until Nick can stand on his own. Robert seemed reluctantly convinced by my words. Sometimes I think I might be going too far. However, I don't want Nick to experience any hardship, so I prefer to maintain our level of savings. Besides, if Nick becomes independent and we have extra money that can be used for our retirement. Saving is also for our sake, so I need Robert to endure this. Fast forward about 20 years. Nick has graduated from university and found a job. He's moved out, marking the end of our parenting duties. Now, it's just Robert and me, enjoying our life as a couple. Now that Nick is independent, my allowance is going up to $400 a month. That's double what it used to be. No more losing all my allowance for social meals. I'm sorry for making you feel restricted all these years. But thanks to that, we've managed to save a decent amount of money. Maybe we can afford to indulge a little bit more now. Really? In that case, I have a request. Upon hearing my words, Robert's face lit up with excitement, as if he had been waiting for this moment. It seems he's been holding back on something for a long time. Actually, I've been wanting a motorcycle. I had to give it up when Nick was born, thinking I'd never ride again. But I want to start riding again. A motorcycle sounds more than just a little luxury. How much are we talking about? This one, right here. This is what I want. Robert seemed to have prepared to persuade me from the start, pulling out a flyer from a nearby motorcycle shop. When I looked at the motorcycle he was pointing to, I was shocked by the price. What? This is $12,000 for a used one? I've endured over 20 years of saving. Surely, this much is okay, right? Well, we can buy it, but just wait a bit. Given the amount, let's consider it a little more. You said we could buy it, right? I'm counting on you to seriously consider it. Robert seemed almost certain he had my permission. I plan to formally agree soon. However, if we wait a while, he might calm down and think a cheaper motorcycle might be okay. Hoping to save a bit more on the motorcycle purchase, I decided to take some time to consider. But during this consideration period, an event occurred that shifted the conversation away from the motorcycle. What do you think about living with my mother? Huh? Live together? That's a big step. But doesn't your mother dislike that idea? That may be true, but we can't leave her alone in that house, can we? If something happens, no one will notice, and even if they do, they won't be able to get there quickly. But we have to consider your mother's feelings. She said she doesn't want to leave the place she's lived her whole life. She also says she doesn't want to bother us. See? If we force her to come, she'll just end up worrying about bothering us. But when I proposed living with my mother to Robert, his reply seemed agreeable on the surface but reluctant at heart. The sudden discussion about living with my mother was due to my father's passing. With my father gone, my mother was left alone in the mountains. My mother is 75 years old and no longer able to drive a car. This makes even going shopping difficult for her. Additionally, she has retired from work and is living on her pension. Given these circumstances, I couldn't let my mother live alone in the mountains, so I suggested that she live with us. However, she was against the idea of living together. It would have been somewhat acceptable if we could rebuild the dilapidated house into a modern, convenient home, but our financially strapped family likely couldn't afford it. Considering the small inheritance left by my father, I had everything transferred to my mother. After that, she began living alone, which worried me greatly. After some time, due to my concerns for her, I decided to suggest a compromise. Hey, Mom. You don't have to live with us if you don't want to leave this area, but could you at least move down from the mountain? It seems the rent for municipal housing is based on income. You're not working anymore, right? So, I think you could live there with cheaper price. Plus, I believe it would be much more comfortable there. I'm fine with this house, but if you're that worried, maybe I should consider it. My mother looked around the room with a slightly sad expression before agreeing to my compromise. I was worried about how quickly the move could happen, but the process and move went smoothly. My parents had lived in this area for a long time and were known at the local office due to their farming activities. The officials knew an elderly person was living in an inconvenient location in the mountains and seemed concerned, which helped expedite the process. However, I was a bit concerned when I found out the rent was $200, slightly higher than I was told during my initial inquiry. Still, it was affordable. This should be manageable for my mother, and if she needed a stipend, it wouldn't have to be a large amount. I felt relieved that my mother's situation was resolved for the moment. However, after the move, I realized I had overlooked something significant. Huh? Mom, is this all your stuff? Can you live with just this? Huh? This is plenty for living. The stove lights up quickly, and I can take a bath anytime. It's convenient, isn't it? I don't lack anything for living. But, surely, this is too little stuff. My mother didn't understand what I found puzzling, looking at me curiously. The only things she brought with her were clothes and a blanket. Upon reflection, we never used a toaster or microwave. The only decent appliance we had was a fan. Furniture like tables and shelves were too large for the small municipal housing, being suited for a large country house. Thus, the new home had no furniture, with only a blanket laid out in the middle of the room. It seemed we needed to start by gathering essential living supplies for my mother's new life. However, it didn't seem like she had the financial means to purchase all the necessary appliances and furniture at once. There would also be the cost of demolishing the old house. With a heavy heart, I approached my husband with another difficult request. I'm thinking of sending a stipend to my mother. I heard before. $300 a month, right? Yes, but I think she might need some more money because of the move. I suggested the move, so for a while, I want to increase the amount of the stipend. How do you feel about that? How much more are we talking? Maybe about $2,000 a month. That's way too much. But it looks like we need to buy all the furniture and appliances from scratch, and demolishing the house will cost money too. But it's not forever, just for 6 months. After that, it'll be $300 a month, and I'll pay for the 6-month stipend from my salary. Your $400 monthly allowance will remain untouched, and I'll just save more on my end. Could you agree to that, hopefully? Well, if my allowance remains the same and you're handling the stipend with your money and effort, I can't really complain. And, it's hard to say, but since we'll be sending $2,000 a month, could we wait on the motorcycle until after the stipends are done? Hey, wait a minute. I've been waiting for over 20 years, and now I have to wait more? Give me a break. If we wait another 6 months, that bike might be sold. I'm really sorry. But, Mom is living with just a blanket in her room, you know? I just want to help her out a bit more, all right? That's not fair. If I say no now, it'll seem like I don't have a heart. All right, human decency comes first over a bike. Despite his discontent, Robert listened to my wishes. I figured I owe him a budget increase for the motorcycle. The following Sunday, Robert and I headed to the bank to set up an automatic transfer for my mother's stipend. Setting up an automatic transfer meant we wouldn't need to manually send money every month, which was convenient. Although I had researched what we needed beforehand, I had never set up an automatic transfer before, so I was a bit lost. A bank staff member approached us, and after explaining our situation, they provided us with an automatic transfer application form and directed us to a table at the corner of the bank. What do I write here? This side is your account, and this is your mother's, right? Oh, right, you figured it out quickly. Well, it says account right there. Anyone would understand. Just read it properly. After some struggle and nagging from Robert, I finally managed to complete the application form. Writing such formal documents always tires me out. Good job. I'll submit it for you. Noticing my exhaustion, Robert kindly offered to submit the form for me. Excuse me, we've completed the form. I could hear Robert speaking. He handed the completed form to the staff member. Soon after, he returned to the table. All set. Because the amount is $2,000, it might appear as 2 transactions when it's booked. Also, we can change the transfer amount via the website or app. I've learned how to do it, so just let me know when you need to make changes. I'll handle it. Okay, thank you. I'll leave it to you. Robert quickly explained several other details. Feeling tired and unable to process much information, I trusted that Robert had understood everything, so I let his words wash over me. On the day of the first stipend transfer to my mother next month, I checked our bank book to ensure the money was successfully sent. Seeing the words, automatic transfer, printed in the book was a relief. The amount was split into $1,980 and $20, making a total of $2,000, which was correct. I also checked for other transactions. Then, I noticed an increase in the insurance premium withdrawal. It was supposed to be for our car insurance. I usually leave car matters to Robert and don't get involved much. However, an increase in the insurance premium required my attention. It looks like the car insurance premium has gone up. Did something happen? Insurance? Oh, I reviewed it and enhanced our coverage. We're nearing 50, right? The risk of accidents increases, and we hadn't reviewed our insurance for a while, so when the sales call came, I decided to upgrade. Oh, I see. I was worried Robert might have been in an accident, but thankfully that wasn't the case. It's good nothing happened. My concern about an accident stemmed from Robert starting to go out alone more often after our son left home and he began receiving a $400 monthly allowance. Even though Robert now often goes out alone, I don't inquire about where he goes or what he does. If anything, having him out of the house on weekends is more convenient and less bothersome. After 25 years of marriage, this is just how things are between us. 3 months after starting the stipend for my mother, our son Nick came home for a long vacation. If you're going to come back, at least let us know. Dad didn't know you were coming, so he went out on his own again. What's wrong with coming back home all of a sudden? I tried to hide my joy at seeing my son after a long time behind our casual conversation. However, through this casual chat, I came to realize something alarming. By the way, on my way here, I stopped by Grandma's house. Mom, you're sending Grandma money, aren't you? She was happy that she could buy regular potatoes instead of the defective or discolored potatoes from potato farmers. But her room only had a blanket laid out, still looking minimalist. What? Just a blanket in the room? I was puzzled that, despite receiving $2,000 from me, my mother was only happy about upgrading from defective potatoes to regular potatoes. The rent is $200, and she has her pension. With an additional $2,000, she should be able to live quite comfortably. Despite her frugal lifestyle, which is very much like my mother, I think it wouldn't be strange for her to at least buy a table or some shelves. Hearing my son's words made me frown, and just then, possibly because my son had stopped by, my mother called. "Hello, Diane? Nick just came over to my place." "Yes, he's here with us now." "That's good." So, we were talking about the stipend when Nick visited. "I wanted to thank you properly again. Thank you for the $20 you send every month. It allows me to eat potatoes." "What? $20? I've been sending $2,000. What do you mean $20? Huh? $2,000? But I only received $20. If what my mother is saying is true, then $1,980 is going somewhere else." This was serious. After hanging up with my mother, I grabbed my bank book and headed to the bank with my son to check what was going on. At the bank, it was confirmed that my mother received $20, and $1,980 was being transferred to my husband's account. Calmly thinking about it, it's impossible for an automatic transfer to be split into two transactions like that. However, I believed what my husband told me without thinking it through, partly because I was tired and not thinking clearly, which was foolish of me. Reflecting on it, the familiarity my husband had with filling out the application form, which I was seeing for the first time, also seemed suspicious. He probably prepared an application form to divert the funds to his account in advance. On the day, he offered to submit the application on my behalf, likely altering the transfer amount to my mother in my absence. Normally, the person themselves should submit the application, but since we had already spoken to the staff, and they knew we were a married couple, my husband's paperwork probably went through smoothly. Moreover, the amount I was sending to my mother was substantial. Given the large sum, it feels awkward to ask, "What are you spending it on?" Mother doesn't desire much, so it's not odd for her not to make significant purchases. In fact, until the conversation about the stipend with my son, I hadn't realized that my mother wasn't receiving the full $2,000. My husband probably thought he could just get through this half a year and then sweep everything under the rug as if nothing happened. Indeed, I had made him live frugally for a long time because of our son and then extended that frugality because of my mother. Still, taking the money sent for my mother's living expenses is unforgivable. I clenched my teeth in anger. Taking money meant for grandma. And a substantial amount, too. That's really too much. "What will you do now, Mom?" To do something this foolish, he really is an idiot. I'll make sure he regrets this deeply. I decided to take immediate action right after leaving the bank. 4 months had passed since I started sending stipends to my mother. Yesterday was the day the money was supposed to be sent to her, and today, both my husband and I had a day off. As usual, my husband went out alone but came back earlier than usual, around noon. Upon returning, he seemed restless and fidgety in the living room, looking like he wanted to ask me something. "What's wrong?" "Come and sit down." "Huh? Oh, yeah. So, do you know anything?" As he sat down on the living room sofa, my husband asked me a question that seemed difficult for him to articulate. However, knowing why he was so anxious, I could respond. "I know. If you're talking about the stipend for Mom, I've switched from sending money to sending goods instead." "What? Why the sudden change?" "Mom said she was happy she could eat potatoes with the $20 we send every month. So, I stopped sending money and switched to a food delivery service. She's relieved that she doesn't have to go shopping anymore because now she gets a lot of vegetables, rice, and water delivered every week. When I think about it, Mom, who almost lived self-sufficiently, probably didn't need $2,000 a month after all. Is that a problem? $20 a month. So, you found out, huh? Yes. Last month, when Nick visited us, my husband turned pale, realizing his scheme to divert my mother's stipend had been discovered. But his secrets didn't end there. I also know that you used the money you took from Mom's stipend to buy a motorcycle. What? You know about that too? Before we started sending stipends to Mom, you were eyeing that bike, showing me flyers from the local bike shop, remember? I went to the shop and told them I was your wife, and they told me everything. Like how you bought a bike for $12,000, that it's kept in a rental garage, and how you requested them not to mail service notifications but to call you instead. Damn it. Why would they spill everything like that? How did you even remember the flyer? I forgot, actually. But, when we went to the bank and I saw the car insurance payment had gone up, I remembered. Then it clicked that the insurance hike was because of the bike. You started going out alone because you were riding the bike, weren't you? I'm sorry. I thought the bike would be sold if I didn't hurry. I was planning to pay back the money, eventually. That's what people who never plan to pay back always say. I will pay it back. So, give me the $1,980 for this month. The bike is on a 6-month installment of $2,000 each, so it would be inconvenient for you if the stipend stops, wouldn't it? Exactly. I can't make a payment of $2,000 with my allowance. Well, if you can't pay, you might have to sell it, right? Don't say that. I finally got the bike. Robert is clearly panicking at the prospect of having to give up his newly acquired bike. However, he has more to worry about. My anger won't be satisfied just by taking the bike from him. Well, assuming the bike has to be sold because you can't make the payments, you'll still be in for a long haul of hell, won't you? What do you mean? I heard from the bike shop that if you decide to sell the bike, you'll get about 40 to 50% of the amount. So, if you sell the bike now, considering you've paid half of it over 3 months, almost no payment would be left. But, I'll make sure you pay back the $6,000 you stole from Mom. You said it yourself earlier, I will pay it back. Of course, I'll pay it back. Then, we'll use your entire $400 allowance for repayment, how about that? Wait. That means I won't have any allowance for over a year? That's impossible. I have to go out for meals with colleagues and such. Make it half then. Let's say $200 for the allowance and $200 for repayment. Why should you, who stole Mom's stipend, get to make demands? You're not in a position to negotiate terms. I intimidated my husband into submission with a stern look. Clearly at fault, he couldn't argue back and was left speechless. However, leaving him with zero allowance seemed a bit harsh, and refusing social meals might affect his work. All right, I'll settle for $200. Really? Thanks. Don't misunderstand. This isn't about splitting it into $200 for allowance and $200 for repayment. What do you mean? It's an advance on your future allowance. This month's $400 allowance will be considered as repayment. The $200 I'm giving you is from your allowance over a year from now. How does borrowing in advance cut my allowance in half to $200? It's not next month's advance, it's an advance from over a year in the future. A little penalty for what you've done, don't you think? But that means even after repaying the $6,000. Yes, it means you're always in advance for over a year's allowance, so you're perpetually on a $200 allowance. However, if you manage to save up 15 months' worth of not receiving an allowance, you can return to the $400 allowance. How's that? Depending on your effort, you can get back to your regular allowance sooner, so it's a good plan, isn't it? Alright, let's go with that. With this, I've managed to take the bike away from Robert, recover the stolen money, and cut his monthly allowance from $400 to $200. When our son was home, Robert's allowance was barely sufficient at $200. Thus, creating a month without an allowance would be nearly impossible for him. It's almost certain he'll be living on a $200 allowance for life. Robert is disappointed about returning to a $200 allowance, wondering why he thought it was okay to buy the bike if he just endured the half-year period of the $2,000 stipend. He must have really wanted that bike. However, I can't let him be too upset over a mere $200 allowance. I relish the thought of him falling into the trap I set. He'll realize he's been ensnared a bit later. After returning to a $200 allowance, 3 months have passed. Robert's allowance has further decreased. When our son was around, his allowance was a tight $200. But after our son left, it increased to $400. Additionally, after skimming off my mother's stipend to buy the bike he desired, he had tasted luxury. Having experienced such luxuries, a $200 allowance was nowhere near enough for him. He started saying $200 wasn't sufficient, so I gave him an additional $100 as an advance on an advance, making it half. However, he still said it wasn't enough, but I couldn't allow an advance on an advance of an advance. So, after spending the $200, I would give him another $100, but then he wouldn't receive the next month's allowance. It's a bit complicated, but essentially, Robert is living on $300 every 2 months. Without creating a no allowance month, he can never return to the $400 allowance, but I know that's impossible for him now. As a consequence for stealing my mother's money, he will spend the rest of his life on a bi-monthly allowance of $300. I told my mother about what Robert had been doing and that I had intended to send her $2,000. However, she said she didn't need the money. It turns out my parents weren't living in poverty in the mountains by necessity, but by choice. They didn't have a large income, but it was average. Even my savings efforts led to a little accumulation. Moreover, my parents' long-term frugality seems to have resulted in a significant savings account. Additionally, after my father passed away, they sold the land. The sale price was modest, but it was still land, amounting to several tens of thousands. I figured the slight increase in my mother's housing rent was due to her assets. Now, I'm saving money by reducing Robert's allowance and continuing to live frugally, inspired by my mother. The pace of our savings is looking good. As I looked over our bank book, I felt relieved thinking we don't have to worry too much about our retirement.